Record. Okay, so welcome everybody to the third JPOMA webinar. Today's topic is what to do if a tenant is tested positive in your building. But before we start that, I've asked Michelle Dickens to come through from TPN to just give us an update on the June collections, just as a follow-up from our first webinar where we did all the collections throughout the members. So I'll pass it over to you, Michelle, and yeah, let's get going.
Thanks, Angela, and to the JPOMA team and the delegates that are here. As you know, I always love sharing data and what we're seeing, so I'm very, very happy to come and share the JPOMA data as we're seeing it at the moment. So I'm going to do a quick screen share. Hopefully I don't do what I did last time and share my emails, but let's get going. Right. I actually closed my emails down this time just in case. Okay, so this is the area that we created in the Joburg area as with collaboration from you guys to understand the data to pull in order to create the good standing ratio. So everything that we're looking at includes all the data in these areas grouped together, and then we create the good standing ratio for that. As you know, you can look at the data individually. So you could look at New Doornfontein individually to what you see Berea, and that'll give you two different pieces of information. So there are going to be areas that outperform other areas, but this is a combination of all that data. Then I thought what I'd do is I'd just have a look and quickly review what I shared with you last month. Exactly a month ago, and this was the good standing ratio during the first 2 months of lockdown, and the green bar that you see at the top, that's the national data of all good standing in the country, and the blue bar, that is the JPOMA area as I've defined in that earlier slide. And you can see what happened in lockdown for the country. In April, we dropped from 81.5% down to 76%, and in May we dropped further down to 70% in good standing. And that data we looked at that data on the 9th of June for the month of May. This JPOMA area at the time, for April, JPOMA area had dropped down to 60% good standing from around about 77%, and for the month of May it was sitting at 45% at the time. Now there is a lag in the data, so what I'm going to show you now is how does that data look, and the number that I want you to remember is this 45.81% of tenants in good standing for the month of May. That was the data on the 9th of June. And there's a lag. So let's see the improvement that we get on that data. So that is the JPOMA data. We were sitting at 73% prior to lockdown. For the month of April, we dropped down to 60%, and May looks like it's going to close off pretty close to 50%. For me, this data, this 50% is not going to shift much. We're pretty close to how that data is going to end. From a good standing perspective for the JPOMA area, and remember it's 45%, so the lag in data collection has improved it by 5%. That means that where we sit at the moment for the month of June, given that today is the 9th of July, we're sitting at 49% good standing, and because of the lag in the data, I expect to see another 5% increase, so we should be ending off in around about 53%. In good standing, 50 to 53% in good standing. So there's an improvement. There's a definite improvement then from where I think we'll finish between the month of May and the month of June. The month of July at the moment, where we look at it from a national perspective, and remember we are only 9 days into July. So what I do there is I look at the data at a day-by-day basis, and I look at how much was the collection in the month of, on the 8th of May, on the 8th of June, and on the 8th of July. And so I can see if we're above or behind where we need to be. And I'm very pleased to report back that for the month of July, we are definitely on an increasing trend. overall nationally, I can definitely see that. And it's not a big shift. It's like a 1 or 2% shift, but it is a definite sustained shift in the data trend. So I believe that we are going to have a slightly better month of July than what we've had for the month of June and for the month of May. I think we've reached the bottom. I think the real challenge now is how long the turnaround takes. And I'm just going to remind everyone that the global financial crisis took us 2 years to recover, and I think our recovery is going to be slow. So that's probably the takeaway message for me today, that we've probably reached the bottom, and that it's going to be a long and slow recovery process ahead.
Great. Thank you so much, Michelle. If anybody has any questions, Michelle, I don't know, are you going to stay until the end, or?
Angela, I'm actually out of here, but thank you very much. I've sent the presentation too, so please feel free to distribute it among your members.
Okay, great. Okay, thank you so much. I see I'm just checking here. There aren't any questions, but I will distribute the presentation to our members. And also with the recommendation that if you are not registered with TPN or using TPN services, it is really recommended Michelle has added so much value in this time with data and information. So thank you very, very much.
Thank you, and thanks to all the members who submit your data. It is greatly appreciated, add value, and I'm glad I can come and report it back to you. That's the most important thing. I can share that back to you, and I will continue to do so, Angela, whenever you need.
Thank you.
Yeah, Michelle, thank you very much. We really appreciate it, and
thanks,
insightful information, so thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Cheers. Cheers.
Okay, bye. Okay, so now we're going to get straight into the agenda. So first off, I've got Andrew Schaefer, and for those of you who don't know, Andrew is a medical doctor. So I've asked him to just kind of clear up a couple of the misconceptions about the virus, and also to just give us an overview of, from a medical point of view, what is happening, and what we should be doing. And yeah, I'll just leave it to Andrew. Andrew, if you'd like to pop in.
All right, thanks very much, Angela. Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for being here. I'll keep it quite brief, I think. Maybe the first thing to say is that, medical science is learning and trying to learn fast about COVID-19. It's a relatively new condition, even though it seems to be part of our working lives for too long. But there's not a lot known quite a lot about the disease in terms of, does it transmit to children? Does it transmit in utero? What are the best treatment modalities, etc. So there is a fair amount of uncertainty which needs to be taken into account. I came across a very useful site I'd like to recommend to everyone. It's on Facebook. It's the Gauteng General Practitioner Collaboration. I'll send it to Angela to circulate as well. It's a collaboration of 150 odd Gauteng GPs that are actively involved in helping and seeing patients with COVID-19 or suspected patients with symptoms of it. And they've written many articles which address common questions. And it's quite useful to look there if you've got particular and specific questions that you have. And I think there's a facility to ask for a response as well. But maybe what I can say, because I think it's certainly proving to be the commonest question that we're experiencing in our branches and buildings, which might be affecting many JPOMA members. And the question is, what to do if you have been in direct contact with a positive case, or if you are suspected that you might be positive. And maybe what I can just say is that the National Institute for Communicable Diseases is the health authority in this country that provides guidance and support and necessary information. And they define close contact as being within 1 meter of a positive confirmed case for a period of more than 15 minutes. And that would even be with a mask on. So the recommendation then is, if you have been within that direct contact definition, that you would then be an exposed person and it would be appropriate to then self-isolate for 14 days from the point of that contact. So just to emphasize, that's what direct contact is defined as, and that would be the definition. In terms of testing, I think everyone is aware that the testing kits are in scarce supply. They are expensive, and there's a delay in terms of actually getting the results back. And one of the big challenges about the testing is that there is a false negative reading in around about 29% of cases, almost a third. So the recommendation is that there's no point in getting tested if there are no symptoms, because if there are no symptoms, it means there's not sufficient viral load to cause symptoms, meaning it's unlikely the test will be positive. So the recommendation coming through from this Gauteng GP collaboration, as well as the NICD, is that, don't test unless there are symptoms and a direct contact with a positive person. It's reasonable then to self-isolate for 14 days. And there's also a recommendation not to test at the end of a 14 days self-isolation period, because in the event you were positive, the positive test results can go on for 6 to 8 weeks after the first exposure, after being symptomatic. But the best scientific evidence is that after 14 days, a patient would not be contagious and would not sort of be a transmitter of the virus. And that would be a sensible approach. So I think the bottom line from a building point of view, from a office environment point of view, is that it's important to kind of create clarity around these parameters, because there's a lot of confusion, there's a lot of anxiety about when to self-isolate, what constitutes a positive contact, when to test and when to retest after, after symptoms subside. And hopefully that sort of does answer a number of those questions. So in closing, Angela, I think I'll send you that article, which I think is very helpful given the current surge of cases and therefore greater number of direct contacts, as well as the link to this particular site. And just in closing, to say that, any specific or detailed questions, I'd suggest you call the NICD hotline, which is 0800 029 999, and the National Command Council has put together that website, which is sacoronavirus.co.za, which has got a host of information and the latest stats and signage and training materials, etc. And that would be another recommended site to have a look at. So unless there are questions, I'll hand back to you, Angela.
Okay, I don't have any questions at the moment. Thank you, Andrew. That was very informative. I just wanted to tell everybody that I invited City Council to this webinar. They did accept the invitation, and Dr. Mary Dacker who's the Deputy Director of Public Health, was going to join us this afternoon, but unfortunately, City of Johannesburg is not allowed to use Zoom. They're only allowed to use Microsoft Teams. So I will be speaking to Dr. Dacker next week and setting up something with City Council. Just from also their medical point of view as well, and what they would like landlords to do and their expectations. So moving on after that, we've got Werner, who's from IHSS. For those of you who have done any of the IHSS training, you'll know Werner. He's done the office preparedness, and I've asked him here today to go through the process if you have a positive case, whether it's an employee and a tenant, and then what are the responsibilities of the body corporate landlords and tenants. So Werner, if you would like to join us, thank you.
Well, thank you, Angela. It'd be possible for me to share my screen? Okay, thank you.
It should be possible.
Hope everyone can see the screen. Yeah, from my side, it's always a very nice thing. So thank you very much for JPOMA for the invite. Come and have a couple of words with everyone today. I think in a scenario, even in my own establishment where I'm staying, it's quite a negative thing if you find out that some of the individuals staying around you might be positive. It does put a bit of fear in your own home, and yeah, it's nothing to be afraid about. Our complex has gone through the process already, and yeah, if the person actually does what he needs to do, there's no initial threat that you have to take over. But unfortunately, with organizations like yourself, yeah, you unfortunately have to plan for necessary things. So the first topic is basically just an employee from your organization. So we know the golden rule: if you show signs and symptoms of COVID-19, it's better for you to stay home. Get tested, do your self-isolation. As what Andrew has said, it's very important that you do follow that. I was looking at a documentary the other night about a woman in Wuhan, for how much she actually contaminated individuals or transmitted the disease over to other individuals by just walking around on the street. And it's scary to think when you come across that. If we have a look at what the directive is saying, and this is the Occupational Health and Safety Directive that came out. One of the biggest things that your organization must do is that you need to inform your Department of Health as well as the Department of Employment and Labor, because it is an employee, and you have to go and investigate to look at the mode of exposure, if it did happen on your property or if the individual wants to bring it to your property. So it's very important for investigation methods always to allow for you to find out how did the person get infected, because with the reporting of it, you will need to have different reporting structures if it was on your premises to a person being infected outside of your premises. Now, if a person does get infected, the directive stipulating that you need to do an incident-based risk assessment. And these incident-based risk assessments, for the guys that has done investigation, you would know that SANS 31010 standard is talking about the different types of risk assessment. Now, when we're doing a root cause analysis, a fault tree analysis, or a bow tie analysis, or anything like that, those are all considered to be risk assessments. But with regards to incidences, things that has happened. So the directive wants you to identify using a root cause analysis by using one of these techniques to identify what type of incident has happened. And very importantly, for us to concentrate on contact tracing. Where did the individual gone to? Who was he in contact with? So that we can adequately trace his exposure that he has done. Now, this directive, like I said, the Occupational Health and Safety side that was launched on 4th of June, we look at what happens if a worker comes to the workplace and he presents COVID-19 related symptoms. As we already know, you as an employer is not allowed for that person to enter your workplace. So it would be feasible for a person like this to notify the employer that he does show signs and symptoms. But we have already seen the intake of individuals within the workplace, feeling a bit ill on a Monday due to the activities over the weekend. And unfortunately, those companies should not take it lightly. And if a person does place those tricks, then you have to unfortunately enforce, because this type of thing is no joke in any type of environment. So communicate to your staff, say to them they must be open, they must talk, and if they do have any signs or symptoms with regards to what the severe symptoms and so forth is, they have to notify you immediately. Now, if the worker is already at the workplace, you have to put him in an isolation, and you have to provide the worker with a surgical mask and arrange for the worker to be transported. That doesn't hinder your staff or the public in any matter. And the person has to be self-isolated as well as go for medical examination. As Andrew said with my conversation yesterday as well, with a friend of mine in the medical industry. He said that they are running very short on tests, and if you're not showing all signs and symptoms, you might find that the doctor will only tell you to self-isolate for 14 days without being tested. So make sure that even if you go to the hospital and they do give you that type of information, that at least they give you it on a form or anything like that, that you can hand it into your organization. Further on from that, the company has to go and assess the risk of transmission and disinfect the area of the worker. Now, there's a big misconception that you have to spray and fog every centimeter of your premises. It is not necessary for you to do that. If you want to, by all means, go and spend the money, but under no law does it tell you that you have to do that. Proper cleaning and things like that, a bit of closure, making sure that the area stays free of contact from anybody for a certain period of time is also a reasonable step to take. But an important part is for you to make sure that you do have a look at the risk of transmission and that you do clean that area, and obviously start your contact tracing with regards to that. So for that individual that has been affected, you need to place the individual on paid sick leave. From there on in, as per the sick leave within your Basic Conditions of Employment Act, and then the employee sick leave entitlement under with the exhausted, you will have to go for the illness benefits in terms of clause 4 with regards to the TERS relief fund. Very important with regards to that, that you look at all avenues to try and use up the person's leave without leaving the person sitting at home without any pay. So it's an important part within this directive, which was gazetted. You'll find that under point number 27.3, that this is the procedure that you can follow. Further on from that, you have to make sure that these individuals do not get discriminated against. A case, I would call it a false positive, that we had at RHSS, we have seen in a matter of minutes, the individual's name came out and immediately no one wanted anything to do with the person. Now, 14 days later, the person comes back. Even though his second test was negative, he still said that he will take the 14 days just to make sure. Coming back to the workplace, everyone walked circles around. Now it's better, but yeah, this form of discrimination does happen. And even within a building which you guys run and own and things like that, it's the same principle. If you know your neighbor is busy with self-isolation, you literally do not want to talk to that individual for that 14 days. So an important part not to arising of the course of employment within the workplace, you have to lodge the complaint for compensation within terms of compensation for occupational injuries and diseases. So if it does happen within your workplace, then you have to go the point method. So it's an important part when we're looking at this with regards to where did he get or where did he contract COVID, you need to be able to identify that in your investigation. All right, so if a worker has been diagnosed with COVID-19 and isolated in accordance with Department of Labour Health guidelines, which is also available on the net, what I can do is I can share the links with Angela so that she can make available for everyone. An employer may only allow a worker to return to the workplace following the conditions if a worker has completed the mandatory 14 days of self-isolation. Like Andrew said, the chances of him spreading it will then be next to nothing. And if a worker has undergone a medical evaluation confirming the fitness to the worker, if a worker has moderate to severe illnesses. These days as well, for one of our clients, our employer or his employer requested him to go for a second test, and unfortunately the doctor said, sorry, you've done your 14 days, you don't sign any signs or symptoms or anything like that. And there's no need for you to test again. Wear a mask for 21 days and make sure that you limit the amount of contact that you have with individuals. So it's an important part for you to make sure that you choose the correct option, but it can happen within 14 days and actually it will be fine. You also have to make sure that the employer ensures that personal hygiene, the wearing of masks, social distancing or physical distancing or cough etiquette is strictly adhered to by the worker when he gets back to the workplace. And also the employer has closely monitored the worker for any symptoms once he returns back to the work, as well as the worker has to wear a surgical mask for 21 days from the date of his diagnosis. So an important part is it's not just a normal cloth face mask, it is a surgical mask for 21 days that he has to wear. And please, there's a lot of people that's wearing these medical masks. It's not saying that they are recovering, it's just that some of these masks are more comfortable than a face cloth mask. So, all right. If a worker has been in contact with or in the workplace with another worker who has been diagnosed with COVID-19, the employer must assess that worker's exposure in accordance to the Department of Health's guidelines. And these guidelines puts the individuals into low risk, medium or high risk. And for that, it's important for us to go and look at what type of category does my worker or my employee then falls under. So we're looking at if it is a low risk, you may permit the worker to continue to work using a cloth mask and complying to the COVID-19 protocols that you put into place, as well as it must monitor the worker's symptoms for 14 days from the first contact. Now, putting a person at a high risk, for instance, you would see that the worker must remain in quarantine for 14 days and the employer of the worker must place the worker on sick leave in accordance to clause 27.3, which talked about the Basic Conditions of Employment Act. So in relation to when we're looking at a positive case of attendance, the only legislation I could find with regards to this was guidelines for quarantine and isolation in relation to COVID-19 exposure and infection from the Department of Health. If you take this heading and type it into Google, you can download this as well as on the website, sacoronavirus.co.za or the Department of Health's website, you'll be able to find this guideline. So the biggest things they talk about is the self-quarantine or isolation, and the biggest things they ask for the person to remain at home, not go to the shops, not use public transport or anything like that, but try and remain only in one place for that 14 days. And they talk about special hygiene measures that the person can take at home with regards to washing living space, how to clean surfaces, how to clean food and things like that. So it's a very good document when you're reading with regards to the hygiene at home. The social relations while isolation, very important. You're living with family, wife, children, things like that. The general consensus, can kids get it, can't they get it? You look at the statistics, there are numbers for children. So an important part is they also give you strict guidelines of what you can do with regards to the social relations of living with individuals while you are positive. And then also guidelines on living with older or vulnerable persons. And this is something that you also need to take in consideration for your vulnerable employees, that we look at a person that's got maybe type A diabetes or anything like that, or you're looking at a person with heart diseases or cancer or anything like that. But you also need to look at a person living with a person with regards to that type of illnesses. So that's why it's very important that you look at the vulnerability of individuals when you self-quarantine. Also, children, one of the hardest things I've seen these couple of months, and that's keeping a child in your house. With your buildings, we have done multiple audits within certain buildings, and one of the biggest things we always see when we walk is children playing around within these common areas. So self-isolation, try and keep the children as much as what you can inside the house. They'll also give good guidelines of what you can do with the children or how you can upkeep their health, as well as with laundry. How you need to wash your clothing, to what we find within your buildings, where on the top of the roof there's a common area for your laundry base. So it would be very good for us to look maybe at a structure to be put into these buildings where everyone doesn't go at once, but try and keep your section maybe inside your home and don't go and contaminate maybe those other areas. And then something very important, that self-isolation for 14 days. It takes a huge mental knock to a person. So the mental health and well-being, they give good guidelines for an individual to follow. And there's also something good for you as an organization, a landlord or anything like that, to be able to assist a person with these type of self-quarantine or self-isolation methods, which we will get to just now. So a very important thing is the enforcement officer. Angela gave me a list of questions, and one of the answers, we talk about enforcement officer, and the definition explains it as the South African Police Service, the National Defence Force, Metro Police Traffic Officers, which is probably Metro Police, your immigration inspectors, as well as police officers, which is listed under Section 1 of the Criminal Proceedings Act. And if a person refuses to self-quarantine or self-isolation himself or herself according to these guidelines, you can inform an enforcement officer to come and have a couple of words to these individuals. An important part is we don't want to create awareness of who is affected in our buildings. So it might be good for you as a body corporate or landlord or whatever the case may be, to have a communication session with your tenants to say that we don't want to emphasize where everyone looks at you when these individuals come into the building. So rather follow the rules and without us having to contact these individuals. Other tenants is also allowed to contact these individuals if they feel threatened in a certain way. If a person don't self-isolate and they know the condition of the person. But it's an important part that you do know who the enforcement officers within your area of operation would be. And what will happen is these enforcement officers will enforce the person to isolate, and if he doesn't comply, well, then obviously they will take the person to a place of quarantine for a period not exceeding 48 hours, but also that depending on a warrant being issued with a competent court. And we've already seen 1 or 2 cases of this popping up in the news where persons are facing a very harsh penalty. So responsibilities of parties, and I'm coming to the end of the presentation, is you need to put a reporting process in place, and something very important for tenants where they can report to you that they are busy with self-isolation. Please do not disclose their identity in any form or any way through the rest of the tenants or even staff that are working. And if the staff has to know, then please make sure that they do not disclose that type of information to friends or whatever the case may be. But it's an important part for you to draw up a process to make sure that tenants can report. For you as well, you need to report to everyone within the building to say that we do have a positive case. They are busy self-isolating. So just to make them aware with regards to what is the hazard within the property. So post signage up, we've already seen even in our complex where we are staying, we on a notice board where you receive your mail, they put up figures, and within our complex we had now 1 case. Unfortunately, the person is a police officer, so it was expected. But yeah, after his 14 days, he was back onto service, so nothing out of the ordinary, nothing to fear for that matter. But it's an important part that you know that tenants have to report to you, and you can make it a lot better than just walking around, not telling anybody, and you're spreading the virus and not flattening the curve. Further on from that, thoroughly clean your common areas. You know that you are responsible for those common areas, the stairs, the lifts, any type of common areas where, you know, children are playing or anything like that. You are responsible for that. So make sure that you get your documentation in place, that you do your reporting, get that data. So if something does happen or a lawsuit may be coming your way, that you have that as proof that you have done what was reasonably practicable, required from you to do. Then restrict access. That is a difficult topic, but you can put certain measures in place, like if you do not abide by our safety rules, you are not allowed to come into the premises. It's something that has happened even in our complex. We had it in lockdown level 5, and even in 4 we had restricted access. You couldn't get anybody. You had to go and fetch them at the gate or stand at the gate and talk, but they couldn't come into the building. So it's not against the law to do that, but you need to communicate this to all of your tenants and say, this is the reason why we are doing this, to have a low risk building for everyone. Then obviously take your screening, do your physical distancing or social distancing and things like that. Make sure you do your temperature readings, your symptom screenings, and you document that data, because it will help you with your contact tracing. Also, if the person comes in, where was he, where did he go, who did he come into contact with, try and get that data. I know people don't always like to share, but it's something very important with regards to contact tracing, because we have done investigations for COVID, and one of the biggest things the guy says to you, but I've only been home. And you're like, but you tested positive, this person tested positive. So yeah, you know, and we're looking at many places out there. We go in, we do our shopping, we come out. They can't say by any means who was there, who came into contact with them, whatsoever. So it's a good method to practice. They also talk about it within the health and safety regulations that this has to be done. And obviously report the information and always review that information. So last part, important, enforce the isolation for a person. Try and help the person, put in a help structure. You know, the person can't go to the shops. Try and make a method available for you to assist the individual so that he doesn't go out, that it doesn't contaminate an area. Try and let him remain within 14 days with regards to that. Very nice here at our establishment is they gave us a whole month of free Wi-Fi, which was very nice. It helped me get through a lot of series, but the help structure is something very important, like an organization like yourself can do. Then lastly, proper risk assessments. And I put it in red, and I wasn't sure if I should mention it, but I've got a friend who's also in the property industry, and we spoke a couple of days ago, and they showed me their risk assessment, and they've got a couple of properties, and they've got one risk assessment that's got 14 points on it. That's all, for 14 properties. Well, and that 14 points didn't cover anything. There's no lifts, there's no stairs, there's no tenants, there's no security. It just talks about hand sanitizing and social distancing. So whoever your consultants is that you utilize within the market to help you with your health and safety, they do cost a lot, and if you do pay that money, make sure that they give you a proper product for you to implement within your workplace, and make sure that they reference the correct legislation with regards to certain things, because it boils down to you're going to take ownership for something that you don't have to. But because you haven't done it correctly, unfortunately, that responsibility will fall on you. So thank you. That's about the only time that I have left. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Werner. I just want to reiterate something. Although there aren't any expectations from the landlord to assist their tenants in self-isolating, it is recommended to create that support structure so that they don't have to go out of the building and that they don't have to go out of their apartment. So it's not a necessity, but it is recommended.
Yeah, well, look, everyone is in the same boat and everyone is fighting to flatten the curve. And I think everyone wants it to go back to the way it was, you know, before COVID. And, yeah, you know, the worst that we had here with the gentleman that had a positive test is that you're seeing sitting him, you know, in his house for 14 days, not coming out and stuff like that. And, yeah, you know, it might be good for an organization like yourself to show that you care. It's always good with regards to, you know, your occupational responsibilities with health and safety to show the duty to care as you as a responsible person. So I would say it would form a bit of part of good practice on your company's organization side to show that you are trying to assist individuals through this difficult period.
Okay, great.
But unfortunately, there's nothing set in stone that you have to do it.
It's going back to the sense of Ubuntu. When all this is over, you know, you still want to have your tenant base. You still want to be considered a good landlord. So, you know, that's a lot of the stuff that I've read kind of says that as well.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, so next we're going to move on to Mervyn. Let me just, okay, Mervyn, I'm just going to put your video back on there. So I've asked Mervyn to come through and to chat to us about the legal requirements. Let me see what is going on there. There we go. And also, Mervyn's come up with a very kind of creative way, a different approach, I guess. So I'll leave it to you, Mervyn, and then you can have a go.
Okay. Well, thanks everybody. Thank you, Angela. So when I was invited to come and participate in this with the panel, you know, I was thinking about, you know, the most sensible and pragmatic way of dealing with the issues that all the landlords face and the tenants too. And, you know, one can follow or try and find research in overseas publications, because the problems that we all facing in South Africa are no different to the problems faced in any other country on the planet. So when I started developing my ideas, you know, I think from the very outset, you know, the first thing that one should do as a landlord is to, as quickly as possible, try and develop a close relationship with the tenants, to try and open up communications, to try and, you know, develop, you know, a principle of, you know, a common good, you know, so that everybody's in this together and everybody's got to work together, everybody's got to cooperate, and the landlord is not to be seen as the enemy. The landlord is part and parcel of this, and the landlord's role is to make sure that everybody in the building is treated in a safe way, and that controls that are introduced is not to drive a wedge between the landlord and the tenants, but in order to maintain some kind of safety principle that applies to all. So on that basis, I thought what we should think about is from the very outset to start this, I thought maybe we should appoint a tenant representative, but to start the interactions. But I didn't think that would be good enough, because, you know, that person might be seen as a traitor insofar as disclosure of information to the landlord is concerned, and he could become a target. So I was thinking a different, sort of a different way as to how to approach this. And I thought of putting up a notice throughout the building at the entrance from day one, immediately, to the effect that everybody is facing this crisis, and that we need communication, and if anybody in the building becomes aware of anybody or suspicious of anybody that may have contracted this virus, they should anonymously report this to the landlord to enable the landlord to take steps to immediately introduce whatever management systems that he needs to introduce. Why I suggest this is because if one just imagines in an ideal world, we have people entering the building and the landlord has his, the basic elements of control, the temperature testing machine, sort of rudimentary questions about where the person has been, does he feel ill, giving him a mask, and then letting him into the building. And that's it. Once he's in the building, we tend to, or the landlord will lose some control as to what happens whilst the person is in the building. So the person may develop an illness whilst he's in the building. Maybe he won't be sick or display no symptoms when he enters the building, but this could occur whilst he's in the building, whilst he's living in the building. And I think it's imperative that the neighbors, other people, report this if it's evident that the tenant or his family do not inform the landlord. So that's why I believe it's important for everybody to participate in this, and by doing it anonymously, nobody's going to point fingers at anybody. Now, that could kickstart the process, because once the landlord becomes aware, then he can do the necessary approaching, speaking to the tenant, making the suggestions, or demanding him going to have or to be tested, or going into self-quarantine, whatever it might be. But what I'd like to basically deal with in this discussion with the panelists and with everybody who's watching is, what do we do, or how do we deal with a tenant who is uncooperative, whether he is ignorant, whether he is concerned about repercussions if he makes the disclosure. He may not be sophisticated to understand the implications. So he may be walking around, he might be living in the building with a virus, knowing that he has the virus, and takes no steps. And even if he's instructed to go ahead and do whatever is necessary, he may still choose not to do it. And as Werner said, he raised the issues of the consequences of a tenant or a family member or anybody in the building refusing to cooperate. What happens next? So it could be a chaotic situation. So we have a situation in the building where we're aware or we're suspicious of a person, and what steps or what recourse do we have? Now, the regulations promulgated under the Disaster Management Act, I mean, they've been amended a number of times, but the latest amendment focuses on various issues, various steps that need to be implemented where you have the uncooperative tenant. Now, the enforcement officer, as Werner pointed out, could be any person as defined in the Criminal Procedure Act, and includes a traffic officer, Metro Police, a peace officer. So it's not your top echelon of officials. A call to there's a direct line to the traffic department, to the police, and it is necessary to make contact and for them to call somebody in. And the rights of such a person, the officer, the compliance officer, would be to interact with a tenant. But it's not just having a nice discussion with him. It's about the peace officer will demand that he must submit to an examination, or that he must be admitted to a health establishment or quarantine or isolation. And if, I'm just reading from the regulations, if this person does not comply with this instruction, the enforcement officer will will remove the person to a place of quarantine for a certain period whilst a warrant of arrest is issued. So the regulations have a severe sanction in the event of an uncooperative person as to what steps the government will take in order to control such a situation. But I think what is very important too, one has also got to understand that how serious this, or the government is taking this problem, in that one of the offences and penalties, or under the offences and penalties in terms of those regulations, one of the provisions states that any person who intentionally exposes another person to COVID-19 may be prosecuted for an offence including assault, attempted murder, or murder. So, as the point is that the tenant may not understand the implications of contracting this virus, but it's got to be, maybe in the notice that's going to be put up, or that I suggest be put up, it should be made clear that this is not something to be just dismissed or disregarded. It is something to take very seriously, and because the implications of contracting this virus and not reporting it, or not taking steps to protect other people in the environment, there's going to be serious criminal sanctions. So I think that's all my contribution. If there's anything else you'd like to ask, or if I must elaborate, please let me know.
Thank you so much, Mervyn. One of the questions that's come up quite frequently is, legally, who is responsible for cleaning the units if a tenant is tested positive and they move out, and a new because my understanding is that normally with lease agreements, it's the tenant's responsibility to clean the unit before they leave, but obviously this would require a special cleaning. And legally, is it still the tenant's responsibility, or is it now the landlord's responsibility?
You see, let's put it this way. In terms of the Rental Housing Act, one of the provisions, if I may just find it, for 1 second, that there's an obligation on a landlord to provide habitable premises to a new tenant. So it's his obligation, and when a tenant comes in, a new tenant, and the premises are not cleaned, the consequences for the landlord, whether legally through the rental housing tribunals, etc., are onerous. So he has a duty anyway. So if one has to start questioning or debating who's responsible or who isn't responsible, and firstly, the landlord is going to be prevented from reletting until the premises are cleaned. So, one's got to be, again, pragmatic about this. If it means if it's going to cost money, it's got to be done. Because if you're going to fight with a tenant or make sure or ask him or take steps against him, there's no time to deliberate and discuss this. It's got to be done immediately. So whether the tenant is responsible or the landlord is responsible, it's got to be done. And the landlord should take the initiative and do it. That's my view.
I've done a lot of reading on the internet, and I came across a very interesting quote from a New York publication. And it says here, regardless of how your lease agreements allocate costs, keep in mind the financial hardships your tenants are enduring. It may make business sense to play the long game and take on additional cleaning costs in the short term to maintain viable rent-paying tenants and your tenant relationship. which I think kind of sums it up quite well. You know, at the end of the day, we're building relationships with tenants. You want to keep the good tenants. You want to keep good tenants coming back.
Exactly.
Okay.
100%.
Great. Thank you so much, Mervyn.
Thank you,
Any
Angela.
other questions? I'm just checking here. Nick, I see you. Are you next? Okay. Thank you very much, Mervyn. And I look forward to seeing that notice.
Okay, I'll draft something for you and I'll send it through to you.
Okay, great. Thank you. Next up, we've got Nick. Nick is, as all you know, is from Jozi Housing, and I've asked him to just speak to us about some of the different things that Jozi Housing has done. So I'll just pass it over to you, Nick, and then you can go.
Thanks very much, Angela. Good afternoon, everybody, and thanks to the previous speakers. I think some very interesting info there. I think there's some common themes that'll come through, no doubt, well, have already come through and will, I think, echo through later on as well. I'm going to give you just some experiences from our perspective on from a Jozi side. We have spoken in the past quite a lot about the sort of procedures in place, and anyone who'd like more detail on those, you're welcome to contact me or Angela or anyone else, I'm sure. So we found ourselves as Jozi Housing, where 2 weeks ago we had 2 people in our head office, in the skeleton staff, and in fact in both A and B teams, so we had alternating teams, who were symptomatic. We sent them for testing. They both came back positive. We then sent their immediate families, in terms of the contact, their immediate families, and the lady who is working on our sort of COVID response, a nurse. So we sent the 3 of them for testing. 2 came back negative, our nurse negative, and the one lady's son negative. That was the one family, the positive. We then sent 25 odd people over the course of the next 3 days in for precautionary testing or screening type testing. And of those we had 11 positive results. We suspect in hindsight that some of those have come from different places, not all through our office, but there's no doubt that there was cross-contamination or infection within our office. So Andrew has spoken about the protocols and how those are being enforced, and I can, only, just, it's a very neat summary, and certainly concurs with all of the information we've had recently from doctors as well as on our positive test results. There's a little panel that refers to clinicians' recommendations, and that's exactly what Andrew has talked about. So I'm not really going to focus too much on that. What I did want to do was to say that for us, when you have a positive case, it doesn't really change too much. Our message to our staff has been, keep doing the basics right. So it's a bit like the flying adage, which is all the rules all the time and you'll be fine. And again, that speaks back to those protocols, and I'm not going to talk too much about those. For us, what has been critical has been communication. I think Werner touched on this. This is ultimately a disease of fear at the moment, and it has the propensity to cause chaos. And so we have opted to communicate as widely as possible, as openly as possible, and effectively the mantra has been, regular and reliable communication, not only to our staff, but to tenants as well. We have a hierarchy of WhatsApp groups that have been set up. There is method in that because we have found that people's ability to deal with severe information, shall we call it, we all need time to process and digest information, if you like. And so we have found that people are far better disseminators of information 24 hours after they get that information, if that makes sense. So we have curated the process of communicating, and as a result, I guess, of that, we have been able to share widely with tenants, as well as with staff and other members of our communities, the fact that we have cases. In fact, those people are known, and that hasn't been a problem. We've only had messages of support and well wishes. We had a case of a building manager last week who was not tested, but was admitted to hospital with back pains and battling to breathe. He has subsequently tested positive and remains in hospital. And again, in that building, we had to go on that WhatsApp group and say, listen, Tato is, he's gravely ill and in hospital and he's got COVID. And this is what, nothing changes. Keep doing the basics right. This is your fill-in building manager, and continue to support. And once again, the reaction has been very positive. So I can only say that I think that in the absence of that communication is key. That if you're not communicating, somebody else is, and there is a huge amount of fake news and alarmist stuff out there. And yeah, I think if you communicate regularly, certainly the response can be quite positive. So yeah, inform, educate, and support is what I've written here. So to Werner's point as well, is that where we have got positive cases, it's key to provide support to those people. In whatever form that takes, groceries, whatever. Part of the narrative that we've been sending out as well has been that, guys, listen, the fact that a large number of cases, sorry, that's a bit of info I left out, is of the 11 positive cases that we reported, they were all asymptomatic, all of them. So the only hospitalization we have was Tato Nogo, the one building manager, and he's on the mend. And all the others have remained asymptomatic. 2 people reported, in hindsight, some flu-y type symptoms, but that's all. So part of our narrative has been that is a good thing. Many people get this disease and don't even know they have it. That's an important point. But communicate and as often, as regularly, and as reliably as you can. In terms of just turning to the office for a bit, obviously one has to shut the office down. Those people that tested negative are able to go back to work. We have, I think, now passed the stage where precautionary testing is going to be happening. So we're in it, as everybody else has talked about, and to what extent we are going to know about or be informed of cases, I'm not sure. I think that what we need to be reinforcing, both with staff and tenants, is that you need to do those basics right to protect yourself, and take that ownership. And then just turning to the office, we have at the moment, we have a situation where we have a couple of vacant flats above our office. And so we've run network cables, and so created 3 or 4 very distinct offices, where people are not going to work separately, but gather around the kettle and have a chat. So that has worked. We've also dived into Google Forms and electronic sort of online in the cloud type applications and communications with tenants. We're way behind the curve, and I'm sure Paul Schaefer will tell you more about that. But just safe to say that the response has been amazing. I think so far, in terms of our most recent communication, 25% of the people have taken up the Google Forms route, which we think as a first attempt is an indication that there is scope there. Any face-to-face interactions with tenants that do need to be held are being held outside. So that significantly reduces the chance of transmission, and that has been useful and seems to give people a sense of comfort. And then the last point that I wanted to make was really that we are starting to notice people are battling. My sense is that, the relentlessness of this, we're now into month 4, is starting to take its toll on people. That people working on their own it comes with its problems, and some people are better at it than others. Some people need the human interaction. I think we all have seen within ourselves the fact that some days you're better able to cope than other days. And I would urge us to be mindful of that with our staff, because I think that now is the time. And obviously we're in a particular phase where some rather severe, shocking information has come out. It's suddenly right in our midst. And that presents things to deal with. And we found that it's important just to keep tabs on people, keep them included. Particularly people who don't live in buildings and are not on WhatsApp groups can feel very alone and isolated. And so this is a time to be staying close to them and doing what you can to help. So I hope that gives you some sort of indications. Oh, I just did want to respond, Angela, on the vacant flat unit. Yeah, I mean, whatever the law says, you got to clean that thing, and it behoves you to do it. I would also say that Werner raised a good point. It doesn't have to be a man in a spacesuit and a big invoice book that does it for you. I wish that the market was such that we had a tenant waiting at the door when one moved out. But the reality is that most flats will sit for a while before they let. And in that case, the passage of time, I think, also is a sanitizer, if that makes sense. So I think that's what I've got to say.
Thank you very much, Nick. Thank you. One thing you just touched on it very quickly, but it's out of all the members that I've spoken to, you're the only ones that I know of that have done this, where you've had a nurse on site. Could you just go into a little bit of detail about that, because I think it's quite important.
Yeah, sure. It maybe sounds more glamorous than it really is. I guess that what we realized early on is a couple of things. The first is that inner city buildings, high density buildings, actually represent an opportunity in that largely they have a single entrance, and that entrance is well controlled. So it presents an opportunity to enforce your protocols. It presents an opportunity to interact with your tenants and provide a screening into the building. What we also realized, as I'm sure everybody else did, is that the advent of this lockdown meant suddenly that everything needed a new procedure and a new policy, and how you're going to do it, and then what's going to happen, and after. And so we felt, as we tried to enforce that management of the entrance lobby as a critical part in the protocols, that we needed somebody to enforce that. We were adding a whole lot of weight, new processes onto the existing staff. Because the building manager and his security and general workers are all key in that process of this increased focus on the entrance lobby. So we cast the net out for a nurse, and we found a lady who is a qualified nurse and was out without work. And so she's come in, and she largely is responsible for ensuring that the protocols are well maintained in the entrance lobbies. We have also made screening available to tenants if they were concerned, to say, let us know, and Edith will come around and do a bit of a screening. And obviously now she's getting quite busy because she's dealing with sort of daily check-ins on the positive cases, as well as doing a first round of sort of diagnosis on people who are feeling ill. So yeah, it's been very worthwhile, and yeah, fulfills it's been a very useful exercise for us as Jozi Housing, and quite symbiotic, if you like. So yeah, that's what I've got on that.
Nick, if you don't mind, what is that costing Jozi Housing a month? If you don't mind divulging that, or if that's confidential, we'll move on.
Yeah, no, sure, that's fine. So you're testing me a little bit here, Angela, but as it turns out, actually, the lady is a tenant in one of our buildings. So what we did is we offset her rent, but she's costing us about 15 to 18 grand all in, including the rent, I think. But that sort of number, somewhere in that region.
Yeah, that's brilliant. So you all score, and she gets a bit of money to go home, and she's got her rent all sorted. That's amazing. I think it's a brilliant idea. Okay, so let's move on. Paul Schaefer from Ithemba is going to give us a breakdown of what Ithemba has been up to during this time, and with regard to their cases. Paul, are you there?
Yes, thanks, Angela. And good afternoon to everyone. I want to focus on the tenant side, but I just want to quickly add to what Nick has said about staff. We've also at Ithemba recently had quite a few positive cases among our staff after the level 3 lockdown came into effect, and within a week we had about 15 positive cases. And we had a stage now where we shut the office down again, and everyone is self-isolating, done all the tracing, did the disinfection of the offices. So obviously we've first-hand experienced how quickly and how easily this virus can transmit. So moving on to Tenant, the first comment I would like to make is that, you know, as a landlord and manager of thousands of units, we cannot take responsibility and on behalf of tenants and occupants. You know, our focus and our strategy is more about assisting our tenants and occupants by various means to make sure that they protect themselves and the people, and the rest of the occupants and tenants around them. So it's more a preventative approach that we've taken, although we've had some cases which I'll touch on just now. So the first part, and I think it's quite similar to what Nick said about your staff, communication. Communication is absolutely key. I think it's vital that we, as a landlord, a responsible landlord and manager, inform our tenants of, you know, what are all the different aspects around the virus, such as safeguarding symptoms, who to contact, and so forth. So we make use of various ways to communicate, from posters, vinyl, lobbies. In the lobbies, we've opened up a WhatsApp channel for our tenants. We've got the email platform, and we've actually used the COVID-19 lockdown period to expand our customer relationship support team. So we've expanded that team, gave them the tools, and we have forced our tenants, or gave them a platform where they could communicate with us for any kind of assistance. So communication and education, that was the first part or element that we focused on. The second part of our approach has been the focus on hygiene, sanitation, and distancing. We've obviously intensified our cleaning regime in our buildings, sanitizers, you know, looking at areas that are frequently touched, and obviously just putting a bigger focus and emphasis on those areas. We've at all the access control points, for example, we've put sanitizing bottles, we've put stickers up asking tenants to sanitize. We're using checklists to manage all these different things. So obviously every day our cleaners have to not just do the work, but complete the checklist, sign that they've done it. It gets sent centrally, it gets saved. So we've got record of all our cleaning work that was done in our buildings. Then other touch points, credit card machines, paperwork, all these kind of other touch points that you need to have a look at, make sure it's properly sanitized, make sure it's clean, and just respect all touch points with tenants. So that was something we also did. Obviously, we enforce all our staff to wear face masks. We encourage our tenants to do the same. And there's a big focus on social distancing as well. Just not just from tenants, but also from each other. So all the things that's been communicated widely, we are following as well. Some interesting things that we've maybe done at our letting offices when we opened, we limit the number of people in our letting office. We've got someone at the front of the door, and they control that. We obviously do our temperature checks for anyone coming into our letting offices, and we obviously have recordings available of all those things. We also limit the services available at our letting offices, so we really try and only help them with things that need to be done. For example, access control, fingerprint enrollment, where they could go online and go through our call center, WhatsApp and email as mentioned earlier. We force them to do that through the online channels and not at our offices, so that we can limit our contact points with our tenants. We also provided free internet to all our tenants. That had the reason we did was twofold. One was to obviously so they can communicate with us easily and more efficiently, but also obviously during the lockdown, a lot of people had to stay at home and they had to find a way to entertain themselves. So that was something we did from Ithemba, and we are still giving free internet to our tenants, and we are considering it, reconsider it on a monthly basis. But at this stage, all our tenants get free internet. Then from a sales process point of view, again, we were forced to do things differently during this crisis time. And we have recently implemented a fully electronic and electronic application and lease process. So there is absolutely no need for any physical contact with prospective tenants. But here and there, obviously, there were a few tenants that wanted to do viewings, but that was very strictly controlled with you know, making sure they limit the number of people that we take in for viewings, wearing face masks, sanitizing, and so on. But the entire application process is now electronic. At Ithemba, we do everything. Credit affordability vetting is done by a team remotely. Then the lease admin team who processes the lease is done on another remote area, and everything is done electronically and remotely, as I said. And even the lease then gets signed electronically. So that is something that we're doing now, and that's all just to help limit the contact points with prospective tenants and our staff and other tenants as well. Then all our units, we talked earlier about getting units ready. We've actually appointed a cleaning ambassador, if that's what you want to call it, in each building, and they would, after a unit is prepared in terms of maintenance and it's now ready for a new tenant to move in, we would then do a final sanitizing spray in that unit, and then we would seal the unit and make sure no one enters that unit until the prospective tenants come and view it, and obviously once they viewed it, we'll clean it again, seal it up again, and until someone moves in. So that's just a way that we quality check, so to speak, to make sure the unit is properly sanitized and properly cleaned, and that our tenants can be assured that the place is being properly sanitized. So those are some of the things we've done in the buildings in terms of sanitizing and cleaning. And then the last section is, what do you do when you get a positive case? We haven't had many that we know of. I'm sure there are more people that are positive that we don't know about. But we've had roughly about 5 or 6 cases in the last couple of weeks where tenants have informed us that they are positive. At Ithemba, what we do is, if they're living with other people in the unit, we give them another unit at no cost. So we give that the affected or the positive tenant the opportunity to self-isolate in a separate unit. We obviously help them set up, and we help them with making sure we phone the Department of Health. We help them with contact tracing, and every day we check in with them. So we've done that with a few of them, and that was quite they saw that as quite valuable. So yeah, that really is what we've done. But yeah, it's been interesting times, and it looks like it's picking up speed now in a big time. So I think the message that we're sending across continuously to our tenants is we cannot rest on our laurels. The wave is hitting us now. We've got to make sure the discipline is there in terms of all the things we discussed earlier. So yeah, that's it from my side. Thanks, Angela.
Great, thank you so much, Paul. How has moving over to the digital world been received by prospective tenants?
Yeah, we were surprised. I mean, we did some research before lockdown. We only had about 20-30% of our tenants who partake in and paid for services. We are now on 85% of our tenants are connected on our free Wi-Fi. I'll give you another unbelievable stat. Before lockdown, our tenants were using roughly about 10 terabytes of data. The last couple of months, we've been clocking 110 terabytes of data. So, wow. I mean, if you have to buy that from cell phone providers at 100 Rand a meg, that's probably worth around 10 million Rand a month of data that we've given away to our tenants. So we are quite surprised how connected our market is. And that obviously paves the way for bringing in innovation and finding other ways of doing business with them, communicating with them. So yeah, exciting times. And as they say, in a time of crisis, never let a crisis go to waste. So
Great. And just one more thing. Currently, you have small numbers, so it is quite easy to move somebody out of a flat into an empty flat. Have you got any plan in place if your numbers increase and you're not able to easily move people into empty apartments?
Yeah, so we're quite fortunate that we've recently developed new buildings. So one of the buildings that's recently brand new that's come on board, we've earmarked that building, that entire building, and we've actually even offered to the Gauteng Department of Health that we could isolate that building, not launch it into the public, and we can actually use that as a quarantine kind of building. So that's one of the places that we've identified.
Wow, that's really amazing. You've given me goosebumps. That's quite a nice humanitarian thing to do. Thank you. Okay, next we're going to move over to Andrew Schaefer again, so he can just tell us what's happening at Trafalgar.
Thanks, Angela. So just briefly, I mean, much the same things. I think that, you know, the key thing is compliance with the basic safety protocols, which are practically achievable. It does seem we need to remind and use security and access control to enforce the basic procedures, and then just make sure the logistics are well organized, that sanitizer doesn't run out, that the signage is maintained, is in good order, and that, you know, we keep double checking. So, you know, we've tried to use inspectors and letting agents and others who are, you know, moving around the properties to assist and do that. And, you know, the ongoing communication and reminders which we've heard about are all important to doing that. So we also haven't had a lot of positive cases, you know, but I think the surge is hitting Gauteng now, as everybody knows. The cases are growing very fast now. So it's going to come and it's going to escalate. And I think that's part of the reason for the webinar today, is that we're informed, we are aware, and we've got sort of well-defined procedures to implement. So I think that does mitigate stress. It allows us to prepare and be more ready. And, you know, it also achieves an aligned approach across many of the different landlords and managers, you know, meaning that we've got a similar approach which tenants become more familiar with and would expect. And, you know, I think that as more cases grow, you know, the tenants themselves are becoming more aware and more informed as well. And therefore, hopefully, cooperation will be found and will sync, you know, will sync with what the building managers and the property managers are trying to achieve as well. So I think that's a quick summary from our side, Angela.
Andrew, did you want to talk about your operational toolkits that Trafalgar has put together?
Sure. Shane, did you want me to start my video? So actually I'm here.
Oh, yeah, no, people want to see you.
Okay, sure. Okay, I'm here in the flesh, sorry. It's not an auto chat bot or whatever it might be. Yeah, so I think just briefly, I mean, every employer is expected to have a COVID-19 operational plan. I think Werner might have referred to that as well. So there needs to be a documented plan. There needs to be an appointed compliance officer. That person's responsible for the plan and implementation on site. It's particularly targeted at the building employees, the cleaners, maintenance staff, access controllers, whoever theirs might be. It would include training those staff so they're aware of the policies, procedures, the protocols. It would involve screening them on a daily basis with temperatures and for symptoms and tracking and reporting that. It would involve supervising the additional cleaning of the common areas and the common amenities, at least on a 4-hourly basis, and making sure that there's a portfolio of evidence and records to support that. So that is the compliance plan expectation. And then, as you're saying, Angela, we've assembled a sort of group of templates on a website page which support all of that for anyone to use. So it's trafalgar.coza/COVID-19. If you look at that page, which I'll give you the address, Angela, to circulate later as well, you know, there's all the templates that support that plan online. You can download it, customize it, print it, put it in a file, appoint the compliance officer, and run with it in that way. And I know Werner and IHSS are running webinars to train compliance officers for additional information and additional training should they require it. So there is that support available for them as well. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing that with our members. I have had a look at that toolkit, and it's it really is fantastic. It has everything that anybody would need to be compliant. So thank you very much. I will share that with JPOMA members. And as Andrew said, Werner from IHSS has been doing a lot of webinars, and JPOMA members do get special prices. So please contact me if you are interested in any of those webinars. Then last, before we get to questions and answers, if there are any, I've got Kate Rowe here, who is a psychologist, and I've asked Kate to please speak to us about victimization, alienation, the more emotional side of the COVID-19 virus. Kate, I will pass it on to you.
Thanks very much, Angela. Hello, everyone. I'm going to keep this brief, even though I do feel this is a very important part of what we're dealing with at the moment. So the topic today is particularly around alienation and social stigma. And first up is why is this so? Why is this happening? And I think there's a couple of reasons. The one is that this is a new disease, and so much of it is unknown. And as humans, we don't deal very well with things that are unknown. That really brings up a lot of fear. And when we are in states of fear, we tend to move into us, or me versus you, us versus them, as a way of coping. So this is potentially what you may see in your buildings with your tenants, or certainly in your offices, as the example was mentioned earlier, where someone came back into the office and there was this sort of segregation of this person. So I want to just say here, we cannot underestimate the emotional and mental strain that people are under. And I think it's been mentioned a couple of times already today that people are now starting to really feel it, or perhaps the cracks are starting to show. So we're going into month 4, and there's a fatigue that's setting in. There's a potential hopelessness and helplessness that is starting to enter into conversations. So I wanted to quickly go through 2 points which are really symptomatic, and I want to speak to emotional overwhelm and certainly to trauma, and how it can manifest in our actions, and how it manifests on a physiological level. So the first is emotional overwhelm. So a certain amount of stress can be very useful. But when we start to feel prolonged times of stress, or we're in a constant state of really big feelings, such as grief, such as stress around our survival, we tend to start losing access to our prefrontal cortex. And our prefrontal cortex is our thinking brain. It's a place that allows us to be empathetic and see something from someone else's perspective. Consequential thinking also sits here. So when we're in high states of emotional distress, we start to lose this capacity. So if we use the example of someone coming back into the office, and I'm feeling very fearful and a high level of emotional response to this person coming back, I'm not going to be able to be empathetic on how they're feeling. Cheapers, it must be tough coming back. Let me be aware of how they're feeling. That's not going to be in place. They're going to do what sounds like happen, where they keep a really big circle and keep their distance from them. So that's on the emotional overwhelmed state. And I'm pretty sure that all of us have had this experience. And I'll use myself as an example. Today I found out that someone who I know quite well passed away from cancer yesterday. And I'd really, I kind of had to take a bit of time to sit and feel through that. I lost my ability to kind of send emails and get stuff done. And I had to give myself some time. And often what happens in emotional overwhelm is we don't do that. So we suppress and we store emotions for later, and that just compounds the issue. Now, if we look at trauma, I know it's a word that is getting a lot of airtime at the moment, but we are in what the scientists and neuroscientists are saying is collective trauma. And this also impacts how we interact with each other. So in our nervous systems, we have sort of 3 levels. It's a bit more complicated than this, but essentially we can break it down to this, where the first level is social engagement. That's where I can interact with the person. I'm feeling safe. I'm fairly calm. I'm quite curious about what's going on for another person. I'm engaged. When we start getting into situations where we're feeling threatened, like for example, COVID, it's a big threat to us. Perhaps we've lost our job. We don't know how we're going to pay our rent. We sort of slip down the ladder into a mobilized state, which is fight or flight. And this becomes a me versus you scenario. So I'm not able to connect. I'm less likely to be able to interact and communicate clearly, and I start to isolate myself. Then there's another layer underneath that, which is your freeze response, and really going into total shutdown. So whether you've experienced this personally or seen it with someone you know, when there's a traumatic event or a high intensity moment, then there can be a total freezing. Fainting is another one, or just a total dissociation where people blank out. This is quite a severe trauma response, but I've seen it quite a lot in people where there's just no way to comprehend what's going on. So the reason I'm saying this is because it becomes extremely important to be able to identify these symptoms in people. So these trauma responses or emotional overwhelm, particularly when you're dealing with your staff members and perhaps some sort of behavior from your tenant. When we get into these highly stressed states, as people who, I want to call us the leaders, the people who are guiding these narratives and trying to create safe spaces for everyone involved, we need to be aware that behavior cannot be shifted at the level of behavior. So we can put in a rule that says you must sanitize your hands, but if people are just disregarding that, you can't. I mean, you can put in harder and fast rules and you can have security there, but to actually shift behavior, you need to look at what's going on underneath. So this becomes important if you're wanting to address any issues, particularly around alienation, or where people are shaming or socially isolating someone who has COVID. So I do realize there's going to be time for question and answer. So I'm going to run through this, and then if anybody has questions, please feel free to ask them. The symptoms may be diverse, and it may seem like this is complex, but the solution is simple. We need to build connection. So whether that's building connection in your office space, building connection with your tenants, it's been mentioned numerous times today. Communication is key. Including people is key. So those are very practical ways to build connection. Right? Connection is the antidote. It shifts us out of trauma states, out of big emotional overwhelm, and back into regulation and back into that place of social engagement. So there are some similarities across all buildings, but each one will have a unique dynamic and a unique way that you can build connection. So some practical ways, communication, we'll reiterate again. Talking to your tenants frequently or talking to your staff frequently is important. honest communication. If you don't know, you don't know. Be honest. Say, this is what is happening in this moment, and we're not sure of what it'll be next month. So what starts to happen is your tenants and your staff members start to be able to trust that you will communicate with them. And that fosters connection, which reduces stress. Don't avoid difficult conversations. So what we can do is, when we think to ourselves, oh my goodness, we can't talk about this. Like, this is going to cause chaos. It's going to cause panic. We kind of, oh, you know, how can we avoid saying this in this way? Wherever possible, talk about the tough stuff, because that takes away any shame. It allows for different channels of communication to be opened. I want to say be courageous, but I think everybody here probably is already. As people who are influential in the community, we need to model the behavior we want to see. So if you are heading up a conversation, if you are talking to your staff and you are saying to them, take care of yourself, please talk about or let us know if you're not okay, and you're not modeling that yourself, then it kind of loses its impact. So as leaders, or as people who are directing organizations, who are involved in managing other people, you need to say, do what you say, which I know is not always easy, but it is very important, because then where we are now, what we do is going to be much more impactful than what we say. If that makes sense. So create multiple channels of communication. It was mentioned earlier, so there's WhatsApp groups, there's email platforms, people can talk to their building managers. Those are all excellent. Sometimes, though, that we can forget that staff need this as well. So it's the person that might be taking care of staff. You know, there might be some staff members that don't feel comfortable talking to that person. So multiple channels or multiple people that staff can talk to communicate if they're not doing okay. Ask questions to avoid making assumptions. So we can do this often. When we look at someone's behavior, we make an assumption about why they are behaving that way. More than ever, if we can pause and ask a question, you might find the reason that behavior is there is very different to what we thought. And if we want to shift the behavior, we need to know what's going on underneath. So I'm just checking my notes here. And then I think perhaps this, I mean, it's still in the line of communication, is talk about how this is affecting us on a mental level and on an emotional level. Talk about the fatigue. You know, have conversations that are like, you know, it's okay to have moments where we're not okay. Now, particularly within your staff and in your offices, as mentioned, many people are working away from each other. They're not coming to a sort of central place anymore. We need to make sure that we are taking care of staff's well-being, which means I don't know what policies were in place pre-COVID around staff well-being, around staff care, but it is my view that this needs to start becoming a priority, because we don't know when we're going to come out of this, and people are going to start needing the mental support and the emotional support. You may start to find that some of your staff members are less productive or less communicative. These can all be significant indicators that they're not coping. And yeah, I mean, this is a lot of the focus of my work. So I really push the importance of our well-being. If we are not physically well, mentally well, or emotionally well, we will not be able to do and function efficiently in our lives and in our jobs, which at this time is really, really important. Well, I think that's probably all I have to say. I've got checking my notes. But yeah, I think, sorry, and just to summarize, so be informed about what mental health issues can look like. And really work on building communication and support structures which grow connection with your staff and your tenant base.
Thank you so much, Kate. Thank you for spending some time with us today. If anybody would like to contact Kate for consultation or advice, you can email me and I'll give you her contact details. She does have very limited time, so it is first come, first serve. She's obviously very busy during this time. So I'm looking, there aren't any questions up at the moment, but I think what's really, what I've seen, it's obvious, the trend throughout the whole day has been communication, communication, communication. And as Nick said, which I've written down because I think it sums up everything: inform, educate, support, and communicate. So I think that's really the way to tackle it. And there's still, okay, I don't see, there's no questions coming through. I don't know if the panelists would like to end with anything. Otherwise, this will be up and available on the JPOMA YouTube channel along with the last webinar. And if you have any suggestions of webinars that you would like us to do, please pop me an email. I'm very open to doing anything that JPOMA members want within reason. But yeah, please, and thank you so much for spending the time with us. We finished a little bit earlier, which is great. And I look forward to hearing from you guys. And thank you so much for the panelists for giving us your time. It is really appreciated. We are happy that you are supporters of JPOMA and vice versa.
Thanks, Angela. Let me just say thank you very much. Well organized. I think it was great information. Yeah, thank you for setting that all up. Yeah, and just to kind of echo what Kate was saying, man, it's tough at the moment, you know. It's okay to feel like it's tough. But you know, we're all going through it together, and we will get through it. And if you need to reach out, please do so. But Angela, thank you, well done, and thank you to all the panelists. Very valuable info.
Great.
Look after yourselves, everybody.
Yes. Thank you.